So Ben Shapiro had Bari Weiss on his show, and there's a million parts of this I could show you. I watched the entire thing. This is why I'm a tortured soul, and this is why you guys support this show and watch this show, is because, you know, I have to do the dirty work that a lot of people don't want to do. Watching an entire podcast with Bari Weiss and Ben Shapiro. So anyway, they clearly think they're heroes. I also watched or listened to Bari Weiss on Brian Stelter's podcast. I love Bari Weiss made the argument that, like, I'm just doing what the media should be doing. I'm covering the stories that should get covered all the time that are not covered. What was her example of a thing she's covering that's not getting covered but should be covered? Critical race theory. Fox News was wall-to-wall critical race theory stuff for like a week and a half straight. I don't know what you're talking about that's not getting covered. She postures as this like brave outsider who's doing truth-telling. She's not covering war from the perspective of these are bullshit and the military-industrial complex is getting rich and we've been lied to and misled. She's not covering corruption. She's not covering workers' rights and labor issues. You're not some brave truth-teller. You're just, you know, repackaging some right-leaning arguments as like enlightened centrism and splash in some anti-wokeness and you think like, yes, I'm a hero, yes! Well, anyway, she did that as well in the conversation with Ben Shapiro. She talked about how when she left the New York Times, the Tom Cotton op-ed scandal was the straw that broke the camel's back. What's so funny about that is the New York Times ran an op-ed from Senator Tom Cotton during the summer riots and protests after George Floyd. And Tom Cotton's op-ed was like, I'm summarizing here and giving my take on it, but it was, fuck the Constitution. Let's do an authoritarian takeover, deploy the military into U.S. streets. And Trump considered that using the Insurrection Act, which is a slave-era law to quell slave rebellions. Tom Cotton was like, yes, deploy the military in U.S. streets. Okay, that's authoritarian. That's a tyrannical crackdown. If you believe in free speech, you believe in the First Amendment, obviously, yes, you can crack down on rioters and arrest them for rioting and breaking laws, but protesters, and over 80-90% of the people who were there were protesters, you have to let them express their First Amendment rights. But Tom Cotton was like, no, crack down on it. Bari Weiss said when the New York Times pulled that article, she was like, I can't abide by this anymore. This is authoritarian. I must leave. Wait, so the New York Times pulling the article is authoritarian, but Tom Cotton advocating for an authoritarian takeover isn't authoritarian? See, this is, it only cuts in one direction. They have massive blind spots that they don't see in their like anti-cancel culture, anti-wokeness, pro-free speech stances. And that drives me crazy. Anyway, there's one part of the podcast that I had to talk about with you guys. Here is Bari Weiss and Ben Shapiro. Remember, their whole thing is we're anti-wokeness, we're anti-cancel culture, we are politically incorrect, we hate identity politics, we hate that this new version of sectarianism and tribalism. Look at this portion of the podcast where they do the exact thing that they claim to hate.
You're obviously very openly Jewish, very openly Zionistic. I'm extremely openly Jewish and openly Zionistic. The yarmulke says it all. But what that means is that I think for you, the aspect of the intersectional movement that was pretty obvious from the start was the crossover with anti-Semitism, yes, which is really kind of surprising and shocking if you're on the left. And it's not quite as shocking if you have studied anything about anti-Semitism in the past, where basically labeling of all sorts of peoples always ends horribly for the Jews.
Correct.
I mean, first of all, in that sentence, you could pretty much supplant everything for the first half of that sentence blank, and then it ends horribly for the Jews.
That's really you just covered all of Jewish history. You don't need to read Paul Johnson's book.
Exactly.
That's it.
We survive, let's eat. Or fast.
No, they tried to kill us. We survived. Yeah,
right, exactly. But the kind of what you wrote about in your book, How to Fight Anti-Semitism, which was looked upon very critically by members of the left, is the fact that there is an unwillingness to look anti-Semitism in the face, depending on your political viewpoint. You and I discussed this before the book came out, because we talked about you coming on the show. And one of the things that I said is, I think that you're going to find that a lot of people on the left are going to be angry at you for writing this book, specifically because you point out that there is anti-Semitism on the left. And if you want to fight anti-Semitism, you actually have to look at anti-Semitism on the right and point it out, and anti-Semitism on the left and point it out. And you have to fight it wherever you see it, or you can't really claim to be anti-Semitism. But that's an unpopular point of view, because there is a pretty strong correlation between belief in intersectionality and willingness to countenance anti-Semitism.
Yeah, I mean, just quick sort of like on one foot explanation is that Jews are getting squeezed from both extremes right now, right? So you know better than probably anyone, what anti-Semitism from the far right looks like. It looks like saying, Jews pretend to be white people. They look like us. They seem like us, but in fact, they're loyal to black people and brown people and Muslims and immigrants. And in a sense, they're like the greatest trick the devil has ever played. And that was certainly the ideology of the man that walked into the synagogue where I became bat mitzvah and killed as many Jews as he could. And he specifically selected that synagogue because the previous Shabbat, the previous weekend, it had participated in refugee Shabbat. The idea of, welcoming the stranger and the biblical injunction to do so because we ourselves were strangers in the land of Egypt. That's the right. And everyone knows that because it's explicit. We don't need to have a Talmudic debate about like going on gab.com and saying kill all the Jews. Like we all see what that is. And because of course of Hitler and the long shadow of the Holocaust, we all recognize it. And there's incredible clarity around it. And the trick with anti-Semitism from the left is that it comes cloaked in the language of sort of justice and progress and social justice. And people are either willing to be tricked by that or genuinely are.
But it seems as though the Democratic Party has really drunken from a lot of this well. And we saw, for example, that the Democratic Party, they had to pass a separate bill in order to pass, for example, Iron Dome funding. Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar have only recently, has anybody in the Democratic Party actually had the stones to stand up and say, it was Ted Deutsch from actually this district. But it took a year and a half for anybody in the Democratic Party to point out the obvious, which is that Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib are not fond of the Jews. It seems as though...
Not that wasn't obvious before.
Yeah, exactly. But
yes. These young Muslim women, they must hate the Jews. That was obvious. Who's being bigoted here? Who's being bigoted? No, Kyle, that's based on the things they said. What, like when Ilhan Omar said it's all about the Benjamins, talking about AIPAC buying politicians, which they do? So she's talking about corruption, but for some reason you can't say it when it comes to AIPAC. Can you say it when it comes to Saudi Arabia? Of course. Can you say it when it comes to the UAE? Of course. But you can't say it about AIPAC. See, this is what we're talking. Everything is twisted, and they're doing the thing that they claim to hate. Oh, God, I hate it when the woke types go right to race, and they play the victim. You're playing the victim right now. You're playing identity politics right now. You're doing the oppression Olympics right now. Early on in the conversation, they were like, well, history has gone horribly for us in the Jewish community, and we're getting it from both sides. We're getting squeezed from the right and from the left now. What are you talking about? And then, they play this game of Israel's like so put upon and so oppressed and they have it so rough. Israel is phenomenally powerful. They are backed by the world's most powerful country and most powerful military. We give them money. We give them weapons. We gave them Iron Dome. By the way, one of the things they use as evidence that Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib are anti-Semitic is that they opposed the extra funding for Iron Dome. Iron Dome is already funded. Iron Dome is already funded. They wanted to do extra funding for Iron Dome. And when Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib say, I don't think U.S. taxpayer money should be going towards a weapons system, a weapons defense system over there, because we don't even have health care here or education here or high wages here. They were like, oh, that's anti-Semitic. Look, I said this before, I'll say it again. I'll make a deal with people in Congress. You want me to vote for Iron Dome for Israel? Okay, fine, I will, if the Palestinians get it too. Well, Israel has a right to defend itself. Do Palestinians have a right to defend themselves? I'll wait. So they're doing the exact thing they claim to hate. And I love how she says, well, the trick with the anti-Semitism on the left is that it comes cloaked in the language of progress and social justice. Maybe it's not cloaked in anything. Maybe there is no anti-Semitism and it's actually social justice and progress. The real reason they say the left is anti-Semitic. Why? Because people who are on the actual left support BDS. What is BDS? Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions movement to try to give Palestinians human rights. It's the same model that worked in apartheid South Africa. That's the same model that worked there to get black people their rights. Do you understand that? So they know this is a potent weapon. This can work. It's also non-violent. So it can work. So what's the last trick in the book? When your opposition figures out how to fight in a peaceful way effectively to get their rights, just call them bigots. Call them bigots, call them xenophobes, call them anti-Semites. Why? Because they want Palestinians to have human rights, and they think the best way to do that is to maybe boycott some Israeli businesses in the illegally occupied territories. That's the most moral way you can fight back. So my question for Bari Weiss and Ben Shapiro is, if Palestinians can't physically fight back, because you call that terrorism, and they can't peacefully march and do it that way because nobody pays attention when they do that, then what way can they fight back? Because when they do BDS, which would work, you call them anti-Semites. So they're bigots if they fight peacefully in an economic sense. Nobody pays attention if they march quietly. And it's terrorism if they do it violently. What do you want Palestinians to do? We know what the answer is. They want them to do nothing. Sit there and take it. Whatever Israel decides your fate is, that's what your fate is. And so if they want to do a slow-moving ethnic cleansing, so be it. And, whoa! Kyle just called it an ethnic cleansing. He must be anti-Semitic. No, I don't play your stupid game. I believe in equality of all people. And I believe in rights for all people. And that includes Palestinians. Israel is way more powerful. The idea that they're put upon or they're oppressed is nonsense. That's why they're against the left, and they say, well, the left is anti-Semitic. They're so anti-Semitic that they believe in progress and social justice. Maybe that's not anti-Semitism. Maybe they actually want Palestinian human rights. God, it's unbelievable. I can't get over there's another giant contradiction they have too, because they always talk about academic freedom. We need to care about academic freedom. But then when the critical race theory argument came up, they totally flipped on that. They were like, get that out of schools. Get it out of the schools. You guys were just saying how you believe in academic freedom and you want alternative perspectives taught in school. And then when critical race theory comes up, you say, I didn't mean that. Get rid of that. Now, by the way, critical race theory isn't even taught in elementary school, middle school, or high school. It's like a college level course. There's this big freak out over it. But notice how quickly they flip on the principle. Whenever it suits whatever their personal beliefs are. They do it all the time. And this is the best example of it here. Oh, we hate identity politics, but we'll play it as soon as it's beneficial to us. And that's exactly what's happening here. They're woke scolds. They're doing the oppression Olympics. They're saying, woe is me, victim mindset. Oh, Jews have it so rough. Jews have it so tough. And the right is anti-Semitic, but also the left is because they believe in Palestinian human rights, and that's anti-Semitic. Spare me. Like, at least step up your propaganda. Your propaganda is beyond shitty, and everybody can see it.